This is the story of how the longest war in human history lasted 781 years and bankrupted every kingdom that fought it. The year is 711. Muslim forces from North Africa cross the Strait of Gibraltar and invade the Iberian Peninsula. Within 7 years, they control almost the entire peninsula. Christian kingdoms are pushed into a tiny strip of mountains in the north. The conquest is complete. The war should be over. Instead, it has just begun. The year is 1492. Granada, the last Muslim kingdom in Iberia, surrenders to Christian forces. The Reconquista, the reconquest, is complete. Christian kingdoms control the entire peninsula. The war should be over. It has lasted 781 years, 29 generations, longer than the Roman Empire lasted in the West, longer than the Byzantine Empire will last after Constantinople falls, longer than any continuous conflict in human history. And every kingdom that fought it, Christian and Muslim, ended the war economically devastated. Spain emerges victorious in 1492 and immediately goes bankrupt. The Muslim kingdoms that once made Iberia the wealthiest region in Europe are destroyed. The Christian kingdoms that won the Reconquista inherit nothing but debt, depopulated lands, and an economy built entirely around warfare that suddenly has no enemy to fight. This is not a story about religious war. It is a story about economic warfare that lasted so long it became the only economy anyone knew, about how the cost of continuous conflict compounds across centuries, and about how winning a 781-year war can bankrupt you as thoroughly as losing it. By the end of this video, you will understand why the Reconquista lasted longer than any other war in history, and why nobody who fought it could afford to win. In 711, the Umayyad Caliphate invades Iberia. By 718, they control everything except a tiny Christian holdout in the mountains of Asturias. The conquest is swift, decisive, and apparently complete. So why does the war last another 774 years? The answer reveals how economic incentives can turn a finished conquest into an endless conflict. The Muslim invasion of Iberia in 711 is not a religious crusade. It is an economic opportunity. The Umayyad Caliphate is expanding rapidly across North Africa. Iberia, rich, agricultural, weakly defended by a collapsing Visigothic kingdom, is the next logical target. The invasion force is small, perhaps 7,000 men led by Tariq ibn Ziyad. They land at Gibraltar named Jabal Tariq, Tariq's mountain, and defeat the Visigothic king Roderick at the Battle of Guadalete. The Visigothic kingdom collapses almost immediately. Within 7 years, Muslim forces control almost the entire Iberian Peninsula. This should be the end. Conquest complete. Integrate the territory, move on, but two things happen that turn a finished conquest into a 781-year war. First, the Muslim conquerors do not expel or forcibly convert the Christian population. Islamic law allows Christians and Jews to remain as dhimmis, protected peoples who pay a tax called jizya in exchange for religious tolerance. This is economically rational. The jizya generates steady revenue without the cost and instability of forced conversion or expulsion. But it also means that a large Christian population remains in Iberia with cultural and religious identity intact. They are conquered but not assimilated. They pay taxes to Muslim rulers but they remember being Christian kingdoms. And in the mountains of Asturias in the far north, a small Christian holdout survives unconquered. Second, the Muslim conquest fragments almost immediately. The Umayyad Caliphate is vast and unstable. By 750, the Abbasids overthrow the Umayyads in Damascus. The sole surviving Umayyad prince, Abd al-Rahman, flees to Iberia and establishes an independent emirate in Cordoba in 756. Islamic Iberia, Al-Andalus, becomes politically independent from the broader Muslim world. This matters because it means Al-Andalus cannot call on reinforcements from the wider caliphate. It is alone, and the Christian kingdoms in the north, tiny as they are, cannot be completely eliminated without resources Al-Andalus does not have. So a stalemate develops. Al-Andalus is wealthy, sophisticated, and controls 90% of the peninsula, but it cannot quite finish off the Christian kingdoms in the mountains. The Christian kingdoms are poor, weak, and control perhaps 10% of the peninsula, but they cannot be completely destroyed and the mountains make them defensible. This is where economic incentives turn a military stalemate into a forever war, because both sides discover that continuous low-level warfare is profitable. For the Christian kingdoms, raiding Al-Andalus generates plunder. Muslim cities are wealthy, Caravans carry goods, farms produce surplus. Christian raiders strike, take what they can carry, and retreat to the mountains. It is not conquest, it is economic extraction through violence. For Al-Andalus, the Christian kingdoms are useful. They justify military spending. They provide an external threat that unifies the Muslim population. And as long as the Christians remain weak, they are not actually dangerous. They are a manageable problem that justifies the existence of a large military establishment. Neither side can win decisively, neither side particularly wants to, and so the war continues, not as conquest, as a permanent state of low-intensity conflict that becomes economically embedded in both societies. This is how a conquest that should have ended in 718 lasts until 1492, because the war becomes the economy, and once war is the economy, peace becomes economically unthinkable. By the year 1000, the Reconquista has been ongoing for 282 years. Entire societies have grown up knowing nothing but war, and something remarkable has happened. War has stopped being a disruption to the economy. War has become the economy, and that transformation makes peace impossible. Between 800 and 1200, the Reconquista develops into something unprecedented in medieval warfare, a permanent military economy. Both Christian and Muslim kingdoms restructure their entire societies around continuous conflict. For the Christian kingdoms of Leon, Castile, Aragon, and Navarre, warfare against Al-Andalus becomes the primary source of wealth, not through conquest and taxation, through plunder and tribute. Christian military orders, the Knights Templar, the Knights Hospitaller, the Order of Santiago, the Order of Calatrava are founded specifically to fight Muslims in Iberia. These are not temporary crusading forces. They are permanent military institutions. They receive land grants, tax exemptions, and legal privileges. They build castles, recruit soldiers, and operate as standing armies decades before most European kingdoms developed standing armies. The economic model is simple. Raid Muslim territory, take plunder, distribute it among the fighters, and use the wealth to fund the next raid. It is a self-sustaining cycle. The more successful the raids, the more wealth available to fund larger raids. The more wealth accumulated, the more fighters attracted to join. Christian kingdoms also extract pariahs tribute payments from Muslim Taifa kingdoms. After the Caliphate of Cordoba fragments into multiple independent Taifa states in 1031, these small Muslim kingdoms pay Christian kings for protection from other Christian kings. It is a protection racket on a civilizational scale. The Kingdom of Castile becomes so economically dependent on pariahs that its entire royal budget relies on tribute from Muslim kingdoms. When the pariahs stop, Castile faces immediate financial crisis. For Al-Andalus, the economic model is different but equally war-dependent. Muslim kingdoms maintain large professional armies funded by taxation and supported by a sophisticated agricultural and commercial economy. But these armies exist primarily to fight each other. The Taifa kingdoms spend more energy fighting rival Taifa kingdoms than fighting Christians. The result is an arms race that drains all sides. Christian kingdoms build castles, Muslim kingdoms build fortifications. Christian orders recruit knights, Muslim kingdoms hire Berber mercenaries. The military expenditures compound year after year, generation after generation, creating economies where warfare is not an expense but an investment. By 1100, Iberia has the highest concentration of fortified positions in Europe. Castles, watchtowers, and fortified towns dot the landscape every few miles. This is not because the war is particularly intense. It is because 390 years of continuous low-level conflict has militarized the entire society. And here is where the economic trap becomes inescapable. The Christian kingdoms cannot stop raiding and collecting tribute because their economies depend on it. The Muslim kingdoms cannot stop maintaining armies because the Christian raids require defense. And neither side can afford a decisive campaign to end the war because that would require resources far beyond what continuous raiding generates. So the war continues, not because anyone particularly wants conquest, because the war itself has become the economic infrastructure that supports both societies. This is the economic trap of forever war. It starts as a means to an end. It becomes the end itself. And by the time anyone realizes the war is economically unsustainable, entire societies have reorganized around it and cannot imagine an economy without it. By the 12th century, the Reconquista has become so economically important to Iberian kingdoms that outsiders start investing in it. And they discover what every participant eventually learns: this war bankrupts everyone who touches it. In 1085, Alfonso VI of Castile conquers Toledo. This is the first major Christian conquest of a significant Muslim city in centuries. It shifts the balance of power. The Taifa kingdoms panic. They can no longer defend themselves with tribute payments and internal wars. So they call for help from North Africa. The Almoravid Empire, a Berber dynasty controlling Morocco, is invited to intervene. The Almoravids cross the strait in 1086, defeat Alfonso VI at the Battle of Sagrajas, and save the Taifa kingdoms from conquest. Then the Almoravids realize the Taifa kings are weak, divided, and economically unreliable. So they conquer the Taifa kingdoms themselves. By 1110, the Almoravids control most of Muslim Iberia. This should stabilize the situation. A unified, powerful Muslim state should be able to either defeat the Christian kingdoms or negotiate lasting peace. Instead, the Almoravids discover the same problem every other dynasty discovers. The Reconquista is economically unsustainable but politically unavoidable. The Almoravids try to fund a unified defense of Al-Andalus while simultaneously maintaining their North African empire. The costs are enormous. Armies must be maintained in Iberia. Supplies must be shipped across the strait. Christian raids continue to drain resources. The economic burden of defending Al-Andalus while controlling Morocco proves impossible. By 1147, the Almoravid Empire collapses. Another Berber dynasty, the Almohads, conquers Morocco and repeats the cycle. They invade Iberia to defend Muslims against Christians. They defeat Christian armies at Alarcos in 1195. They look unstoppable. And then they go bankrupt. The costs of maintaining armies in Iberia, shipping supplies from Africa, and defending against Christian raids exceed the revenue Al-Andalus generates. The Almohads withdraw. Muslim Iberia fragments again. This cycle repeats 3 times. Almoravids, Almohads, and later the Marinids all intervene from North Africa. All of them are militarily successful initially. All of them are economically destroyed by the costs of the Reconquista. Meanwhile, Christian kingdoms receive their own foreign investment. Crusaders from France, England, and Germany arrive to fight Muslims in Iberia. European nobles see the Reconquista as an opportunity for land, plunder, and religious merit. They discover the same reality. The Reconquista consumes wealth faster than it generates it. French crusaders help Alfonso I conquer Zaragoza in 1118. They expect rich rewards. They receive land in a war zone where Christian and Muslim raids make agriculture barely viable. Most return home poorer than they arrived. English crusaders help Portuguese kings conquer Lisbon in 1147. They take plunder from the city and leave. The Portuguese crown inherits a depopulated city, devastated agricultural lands, and ongoing military costs to defend it. By 1200, the pattern is clear. Participating in the Reconquista, even on the winning side, is economically destructive, but the war has been going on for 489 years. Entire economic systems are built around it. Nobody knows how to stop. In 1212, the Christian kingdoms win the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa. It is the decisive turning point of the Reconquista. Muslim power in Iberia collapses. Christian conquest accelerates. By 1248, only Granada remains Muslim. The Christians have effectively won, and that is when the real economic catastrophe begins. Las Navas de Tolosa breaks the Almohad Empire and shatters Muslim unity in Iberia. Christian armies pour south. Ferdinand II of Castile conquers Cordoba in 1236, Seville in 1248. James I of Aragon conquers Valencia in 1238, the Balearic Islands in 1229. Alfonso III of Portugal completes the conquest of the Algarve in 1249. By 1250, the Reconquista is essentially over. Only the Emirate of Granada survives, and it survives by paying massive tribute to Castile. The war has been won. But the Christian kingdoms are economically devastated, because conquering Muslim territory is not like conquering Christian Europe. When a medieval European kingdom conquers another, it inherits a functioning economy. Peasants farm, towns produce, tax revenues continue. When Christian kingdoms conquer Al-Andalus, they inherit ruins. Centuries of raiding have depopulated the countryside. Muslim populations flee. Those who remain are expelled or forcibly converted. The sophisticated irrigation systems that made Al-Andalus agricultural collapse from lack of maintenance. Cordoba, which once had 400,000 people under Muslim rule, has 60,000 under Christian rule by 1280. Seville declines from 150,000 to 40,000. The economic infrastructure that made these cities wealthy evaporates. Christian kingdoms try to repopulate conquered lands with Christian settlers, but settlers do not want to move to a former war zone where raids might resume. The crown offers land grants, tax exemptions, legal privileges. It is not enough. Much of conquered Al-Andalus remains depopulated for generations. And the military costs do not end. Granada remains Muslim and hostile. The Christian kingdoms must maintain expensive frontier defenses. Castile keeps permanent garrisons in dozens of fortified towns. The military expenditures that were supposed to end with victory continue indefinitely. Worse, the Christian economies have been organized around raiding and tribute for centuries. With no more Muslim kingdoms to raid except Granada, the revenue from parias collapses. Castile's royal finances, dependent on tribute payments, face crisis after crisis. By 1300, the Reconquista has been won militarily but lost economically. Castile is chronically bankrupt. Aragon is in debt to Italian bankers. Portugal has conquered the Algarve but cannot afford to defend it properly. The kingdoms that won the 589-year war are poorer than they were before. And Granada, the last Muslim kingdom, survives by being economically useful. Granada pays tribute. Granada trades with Christian kingdoms. Granada is weak enough not to be threatening but wealthy enough to be worth preserving as a source of revenue. So Granada survives another 242 years. Not because it is militarily strong, because the Christian kingdoms need its tribute payments to function. The Reconquista continues because ending it means ending a revenue stream nobody can afford to lose. In January 1492, Granada surrenders to Ferdinand and Isabella. The Reconquista is complete. After 781 years, the war is finally over, and within months, Spain is bankrupt. The victory nobody could afford has finally been achieved, and it destroys the winners as thoroughly as it destroyed the losers. Ferdinand and Isabella begin the final conquest of Granada in 1482. It takes 10 years, not because Granada is militarily strong, because Castile and Aragon are broke. Castile has been in continuous financial crisis for a century. The Castilian crown borrows money from Italian and Flemish bankers to fund the war, sells bonds called juros to Spanish nobles and merchants, debases the currency to stretch resources. None of it is enough. The siege of Granada is enormously expensive. Maintaining armies in the field for 10 years costs millions of maravedis. Ferdinand and Isabella take out massive loans. They promise bankers shares of future conquest plunder and tribute. They mortgage tax revenues decades in advance. Granada finally surrenders in January 1492. Ferdinand and Isabella enter the Alhambra. The Reconquista is complete. Christian kingdoms control the entire Iberian peninsula for the first time since 711. And the economic disaster becomes immediately apparent. Granada was paying tribute. Conquered Granada generates almost no revenue. The sophisticated Muslim economy collapses. Muslims are given 3 months to convert to Christianity or leave. Many leave, taking their skills and wealth with them. The lands Ferdinand and Isabella have conquered are economically worthless. Centuries of war have devastated the countryside. Depopulation makes tax revenue minimal, and the crown's debts are crushing. Spain in 1492 is technically victorious and practically bankrupt. The war that defined Iberian society for 781 years has ended, and nobody knows how to run an economy without it. This is why Spain immediately seeks new wars. Christopher Columbus reaches the Americas in October 1492, 9 months after Granada falls. This is not coincidence. Spain needs a new source of plunder and conquest because the Reconquista is over and the economy built around it has collapsed. The conquest of the Americas becomes Spain's solution to the bankruptcy caused by winning the Reconquista. but it is just exporting the same economic model, conquest and plunder instead of sustainable economy, to a new theater. By 1560, Spain is receiving enormous quantities of silver from American mines. And by 1560, Spain is bankrupt again. The pattern repeats, because Spain never learned to build an economy that was not based on permanent warfare and extraction. The Reconquista ended in 1492, but its economic legacy lasted for centuries. Spain's economy, its culture, its entire approach to warfare and state building was shaped by 781 years of continuous conflict, and the patterns established during the Reconquista would bankrupt Spain repeatedly for the next 300 years. The Reconquista taught the Spanish kingdoms a series of economic lessons that proved catastrophically wrong. Lesson 1: military spending generates wealth through plunder. For centuries, this was true. Christian raids on Al-Andalus brought back gold, slaves, and goods. Parias from Taifa kingdoms filled royal treasuries. Military spending was an investment that returned profits. But this only worked while there were wealthy enemies to raid. Once Al-Andalus was conquered, military spending became pure cost. Spain kept spending as if plunder would continue. It did not. Lesson 2: permanent warfare is economically sustainable. For 781 years, the Reconquista continued without destroying the Christian kingdoms. They adapted. They built economies around war. It seemed sustainable. But it was only sustainable because the war never required total mobilization. It was continuous low-intensity conflict punctuated by occasional large campaigns. When Spain tried to apply the same model to European wars in the 16th century, fighting France, the Dutch, the Ottomans simultaneously, it collapsed. Lesson 3: conquered territory generates revenue immediately. This was never true in the Reconquista, but Spanish kings kept expecting it. Conquered Muslim lands took generations to become economically productive, but the crown kept borrowing against expected future revenues that never materialized. Spain applied these false lessons to the conquest of the Americas. The expectation was that American gold and silver would fund Spanish power indefinitely. Instead, the wealth from the Americas funded debt payments to foreign bankers. Spain became the richest poor country in Europe, enormous revenues flowing through the economy without creating sustainable growth. The Spanish Habsburgs, ruling from 1516 to 1700, declared bankruptcy 7 times. Every Spanish king from Charles V to Charles II presided over at least one state bankruptcy. The wealthiest empire in the world could not pay its bills. This is the legacy of the Reconquista, an economy structured around permanent warfare, extraction, and plunder, an inability to build sustainable institutions because war was the only institution that mattered, a financial system based on borrowing against future conquests rather than productive investment. The Reconquista created Spain as a great power, and the economic lessons of the Reconquista destroyed Spain as a great power. The Reconquista is the longest continuous war in human history, and it ended with everyone who fought it bankrupt. The Christians, who had spent 781 years conquering a peninsula they could not afford to govern. The Muslims, who lost, spent 781 years defending an Iberia they could not afford to keep. And the lesson that history keeps teaching, and that every generation keeps ignoring, is that forever wars bankrupt everyone. The Reconquista started as a conquest. It became a forever war because both sides discovered that continuous low-intensity conflict was economically viable. Christian kingdoms raided for plunder. Muslim kingdoms collected taxes and paid tribute to avoid conquest. Neither side could win decisively. Neither side particularly wanted to. The war became self-sustaining. But economic viability is not the same as economic sustainability. The Reconquista was viable. It continued for 781 years, but it was never sustainable. It slowly drained resources, depopulated lands, and reorganized societies around permanent conflict. By the time it ended, nobody remembered how to build an economy that was not based on war. Spain learned this in 1492, and spent the next 300 years going bankrupt repeatedly because it never unlearned the economic lessons of the Reconquista. The Reconquista lasted 781 years and bankrupted everyone who fought it. That is not a historical curiosity, that is a warning.
That history doesn't apply here.